The storm hit faster than anyone predicted. Grace Morno pressed her hands against the cold window of the island chapel, watching the last ferry disappear into sheets of rain. Her heart hammered in her chest. The boat wasn't supposed to leave for another 3 hours. She was supposed to be on it, heading back to the mainland, back to the convent in San Francisco where she'd spent the last 6 years preparing for her final vows. Instead, she was stranded. They're not coming back. Before we continue, kindly subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share in the comments where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to see how far this story travels. Now sit back, grab some popcorn, and prepare yourself, because what you're about to hear might just challenge everything you thought you knew about people. And if you're ready, let's begin. Grace spun around. A man stood in the chapel doorway, soaked through, his dark hair dripping water onto the stone floor. She recognized him from earlier that morning. He'd been sitting alone on the beach when she'd arrived at the retreat center for her week-long silent meditation. She'd noticed the way he stared at the ocean like he was searching for something he'd lost. "What do you mean?" Grace asked, her voice tight. "Radio's dead, phone lines are down, the storm's a Category 3 now." He stepped inside and she saw the military dog tags hanging around his neck. "They evacuated everyone 2 hours ago, guess they forgot about us." Grace's breath caught. "That's not possible. Sister Margaret knew I was here, she wouldn't just leave me." "Well, she did." The man walked to the window beside her, his presence too close, too real. "I'm Connor Blake, and unless you can walk on water, we're stuck here until this thing passes." She stepped back, creating distance. "How long?" "Could be days, could be a week." Connor's jaw tightened. "The island's only got one building still standing, this chapel. Everything else is too close to the water. We're going to have to ride this out together." Grace felt the walls closing in. She'd spent 6 years in the convent, surrounded by sisters, protected by routine and prayer and purpose. She'd been alone with men maybe 3 times in all those years, and always with a chaperone. The idea of being trapped here, alone with a stranger, made her skin prickle with something that felt dangerously like fear. Or maybe it wasn't fear at all. "There has to be another way," she said. "Another boat, a radio somewhere that works." "You think I didn't check?" Connor's voice came out harder than he meant. He ran a hand through his wet hair. "Look, I'm not happy about this either. I came here to be alone, but we don't have a choice." The lights flickered once, then died completely. Darkness swallowed them whole. Grace gasped. She heard Connor move, heard his footsteps coming closer. Then she felt his hand on her arm, steady and warm. "It's okay," he said, his voice softer now. "There should be candles somewhere. Churches always have candles." "I'm not afraid of the dark," Grace lied. "Sure you're not?" She could hear the hint of a smile in his voice. "Stay here, I'll find them." But she didn't want to stay in the dark alone. Grace followed the sound of his movement, her hands outstretched. Her fingers brushed against something solid, his back. Connor stopped. "You're following me," he said. "I know where the candles are," Grace replied. "I was here earlier." It was a lie, but she couldn't admit the truth. That being alone in the darkness felt worse than being close to him. Together, they fumbled through the chapel. Grace's eyes slowly adjusted. She could make out shapes now: pews, the altar, the statue of Mary in the corner. Her hand found a small cabinet near the entrance. Inside, exactly as she'd hoped, were emergency candles and matches. Connor lit one. The flame cast dancing shadows across his face. For the first time, Grace really looked at him. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe 30. There were scars on his hands. His eyes held the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. "You're military," she said, nodding at his dog tags. Got out 6 months ago." Connor set the candle down on a pew. "Afghanistan 3 tour." "Is that why you're here, at the retreat center?" His expression closed off. "I could ask you the same thing. What's a nun doing alone on an island?" "I'm not a nun yet, not officially." Grace wrapped her arms around herself. "I take my final vows in 2 weeks. This was supposed to be my last retreat, my last chance to make sure." "Make sure of what?" "That I'm choosing this for the right reasons." Connor studied her in the candlelight. She was younger than he'd first thought too. Mid-20s maybe. She had kind eyes and dark hair pulled back in a simple braid. She wore civilian clothes, jeans, and a sweater, but she held herself like someone who'd spent years learning to be invisible. "And are you," he asked, "choosing it for the right reasons?" Grace met his gaze. "I don't know anymore." The confession hung between them like smoke. Outside, the wind howled. Something crashed against the side of the chapel, making Grace jump. Connor moved to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. "We need to secure the doors," he said. "This is going to get worse before it gets better." They worked in silence, dragging pews against the main entrance, checking the windows for leaks. Connor moved with military precision, his movements efficient and controlled. Grace found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. Hours passed. The storm raged. They made a small camp near the altar where it was warmest, using cushions from the pews and blankets Grace found in a storage closet. Connor rationed the candles. They had maybe 20, he said, had to make them last. "Tell me something," Connor said as they sat across from each other, a candle burning between them. "Why does someone your age lock herself away from the world?" Grace stiffened. "I'm not locked away, I chose this life." "That doesn't answer my question." "Why did you go to war?" she countered. Connor's smile was bitter. "Touché. We both made sacrifices," Grace said quietly, "just different kinds." "Yeah, but I can leave mine behind, can you?" The question hit harder than it should have. Grace looked away, her fingers finding the small cross she wore around her neck. She'd asked herself the same thing 1,000 times in the last 6 months, ever since she'd started having doubts, ever since she'd started wondering if dedication was the same thing as calling. "I don't want to talk about this," she said. "Fine, what do you want to talk about?" "Nothing, we should sleep, morning will come faster that way." But Connor didn't move. He kept staring at her like he could see through all the walls she'd built. "You're running from something," he said. "I recognize it because I'm running too." Grace's throat tightened. "You don't know me." "No, but I know what it looks like when someone's trying to disappear." The candle flickered. For a moment, Grace thought it would go out, leaving them in darkness again, but it steadied, the flame growing stronger. "Get some sleep," Connor said finally. "I'll keep watch." "Keep watch for what?" "Old habit." Grace lay down on her makeshift bed, pulling a blanket over herself. She could feel Connor's presence across from her, solid and real. She closed her eyes and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. All she could think about was the way his hand had felt on her arm in the darkness. Steady, warm humans. Outside, the storm screamed, and somewhere deep inside Grace Morno, something she'd buried for 6 long years began to wake up. Grace woke to silence. The storm had stopped. Pale morning light filtered through the stained glass windows, painting colors across the stone floor. She sat up slowly, her body aching from sleeping on the hard ground. Connor was gone. Panic flared in her chest. She stood quickly, scanning the chapel. The pews they'd used to barricade the door had been moved. The door stood slightly ajar. Grace stepped outside and stopped breathing. The island was destroyed. Trees lay scattered like broken toys. The retreat center where she'd planned to spend her week was nothing but debris. The dock had vanished completely, torn away by the waves. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, calm now as if the storm had never happened. She found Connor on the beach, standing knee-deep in water. "What are you doing?" she called out. He didn't turn around, looking for supplies, anything that might have washed up. Grace walked down to the waterline, careful to keep her distance from the waves. "Did you find anything?" "Some wood, plastic containers, nothing useful." Connor finally looked at her. In the daylight, she could see the exhaustion carved into his face. "You should have stayed inside. I woke up and you were gone." Something flickered in his expression. "I told you I'd keep watch." "The storm's over." "Yeah, but we're still stuck." Connor moved past her, carrying a piece of driftwood. "I'm going to check the retreat center, see if any food survived." Grace followed him up the path. The destruction looked worse up close. Buildings had collapsed. Everything was soaked, ruined. Connor moved through the wreckage with careful precision, lifting boards, checking corners. "You're good at this," Grace observed. "At what?" "Surviving." Connor paused, his back to her. "It's what they trained me for." "Is that what you did in Afghanistan?" His shoulders tensed, among other things. Grace wanted to ask more, but something in his posture stopped her. Instead, she started searching too. She found a cabinet that had somehow stayed intact. Inside were canned goods, bottles of water, protein bars. "Connor, over here." He came quickly. When he saw what she'd found, relief crossed his face. Good, this'll last us a few days at least. And then what? And then someone will come looking for us, but he didn't sound convinced. They carried the supplies back to the chapel in silence. Grace's mind raced with questions she didn't want to ask. How long before someone realized they were missing? Would the convent send people to search for her? Did anyone even know Connor was here? Inside the chapel, they organized their supplies. Connor divided everything into rations. His movements were methodical, controlled. Grace recognized it now, the way he held himself, like he was always preparing for the next battle. You never told me why you're here, Grace said, breaking the silence. At the retreat center. Connor's hand stilled, contorted. What? I got into a fight 3 months ago, bar in Oakland. Guy said something I didn't like. Connor's jaw tightened. Judge gave me a choice, anger management therapy or jail time. Grace sat down on a pew. So you came here. The retreat center ran a program for veterans supposed to help us reintegrate or whatever. His voice was bitter. Didn't think I needed it, thought the judge was overreacting. And now? Connor met her eyes. Now I'm stuck on an island with a nun who's having second thoughts. God's got a hell of a sense of humor. Grace should have been offended. Instead, she almost smiled. I'm not a nun yet. Why? Connor sat down across from her. Why the convent? What happened to you? The question was too direct, too honest. Grace's instinct was to deflect, to hide behind the practiced answers she'd given for years, but something about the way Connor looked at her made lying feel impossible. My sister died, she said quietly. 7 years ago, car accident, she was 19. Connor's expression softened. I'm sorry. We were close, best friends. When she died, I felt like half of me disappeared. Grace's fingers found her cross again. I was angry at God, angry at the world. I stopped going to church, stopped believing in anything good. So you joined a convent? Connor's tone was gentle, not mocking. Not right away. I spent 2 years destroying myself. Parties, drinking, bad relationships. I was trying to fill the emptiness, but nothing worked. Grace took a shaky breath. Then one day I walked past a church. I don't even know why I went in, but I sat there for hours and I felt peace for the first time since she died. And you thought that meant you should become a nun. I thought it meant God was calling me, that maybe this was my purpose, to dedicate my life to something bigger than my pain. Connor was quiet for a long moment. Or maybe you were just looking for a place to hide. The words stung because they were true. Grace stood up quickly. You don't understand. Don't I? Connor stood too. You think I don't know what it's like to run from pain, to find some mission or cause to bury yourself in so you don't have to feel anything. That's not what I'm doing. Isn't it? He stepped closer. You said it yourself, you don't even know if you're choosing this for the right reasons. Grace's heart pounded. And what would you know about choosing anything? You said you were contorted to be here. Sounds like you're just as lost as I am. Connor flinched. The hit landed. You're right, he said quietly. I am lost. I've been lost since I came home, since I watched my best friend die in my arms and couldn't do anything to save him. The confession hung between them, raw and painful. Grace's anger dissolved. Connor, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. His name was Marcus. Connor's voice was hollow. We joined up together, did everything together. He was supposed to be my best man when I got married. You were engaged. She left while I was on my 3rd deployment, said she couldn't handle the waiting anymore. Couldn't handle not knowing if I'd come home. Connor laughed, but there was no humor in it. Turned out Marcus was the one who didn't come home. Grace wanted to reach out to comfort him somehow, but she didn't know how. She'd spent 6 years learning to pray for people's pain, not sit with it. How long ago? She asked. 14 months, 1 week, 3 days. Connor's hands clenched into fists. I can still hear the explosion, still smell the smoke, and the worst part, I was the ranking officer. I'm the one who sent him into that building. It wasn't your fault. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Grace's voice was firm. You can't control everything. Bad things happen and sometimes there's no one to blame. Connor's eyes locked onto hers. Is that what you tell yourself about your sister? The question pierced through her defenses. Grace felt tears building, hot and unwanted. She turned away, but Connor caught her wrist. "Don't," he said softly, "don't hide, not from me." Grace's breath hitched, his hand on her wrist felt like fire. She should pull away, she knew she should, but she couldn't make herself move. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of everything, of choosing wrong, of wasting my life, of admitting that maybe I've been hiding for 6 years instead of healing." Connor's thumb brushed against her pulse point. Could he feel how fast her heart was racing? "You're not wasting anything," he said, "you're just figuring it out." "And what if I never figure it out?" "Then you keep trying." Connor's voice was rough. "That's all any of us can do." Grace finally looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the scars he carried, both visible and hidden. She saw the pain and the guilt and the desperate need for redemption. She saw herself reflected back. And she saw something else too, something dangerous. "We should eat," she said, pulling her wrist free. "Keep our strength up." Connor stepped back, giving her space. "Yeah, good idea." They ate in silence, the air between them charged with everything they hadn't said. Grace's wrist still tingled where he'd touched her. She pressed her hand against it, trying to make the feeling go away. It didn't work. Outside, clouds were gathering again. The wind picked up, rattling the chapel windows. "Another storm's coming," Connor said, moving to look outside. "So soon?" "The weather's unpredictable out here." He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "We might be stuck longer than I thought." Grace's stomach dropped. More days alone with him, more nights in the candlelight, more conversations that stripped away her carefully constructed walls. More chances for her to feel things she'd sworn she'd never feel again. "How much longer?" she asked. Connor's eyes held hers. "As long as it takes." Thunder rumbled in the distance. The chapel suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Grace couldn't tell if the storm she feared was the one outside or the one building inside her chest. All she knew was that something had shifted between them, something she couldn't name and couldn't stop. And when Connor looked at her like that, like she was something precious and breakable and worth saving, Grace felt her carefully ordered world beginning to crack. The second storm hit at nightfall. This one was worse. Wind screamed through cracks in the chapel walls. Rain hammered against the roof so hard it sounded like the building might collapse. Grace sat huddled near the altar, watching water leak through the ceiling in 3 different places. Connor moved between the leaks, positioning containers to catch the water. His shirt was soaked. He'd been outside trying to secure loose debris before the worst hit. "You need to change," Grace said. "You'll get hypothermia." "I'm fine." "You're shivering." Connor ignored her, adjusting another container. Grace stood and walked to the storage closet where they'd found the blankets. She pulled out the driest one and brought it to him. "Connor, stop," she held out the blanket. "Please." He finally looked at her, his lips had a faint blue tinge. Stubborn man. "At least take your shirt off," Grace said, then felt her face heat. "I mean, you need to get dry, that's what you're supposed to do, basic survival." A slight smile tugged at Connor's mouth. "You blushing, Grace. I'm just trying to keep you alive." "Since when is that your job?" "Since you're the only other person on this island." Grace thrust the blanket at him. "Don't make me pull rank." "What rank? You're not a nun yet, remember." But he took the blanket. Grace turned around, giving him privacy. She heard the wet fabric hit the floor, heard him wrap the blanket around himself. "Okay," he said, "I'm decent." Grace turned back. Connor sat on a pew, the blanket around his shoulders. Without his shirt, she could see more scars. Some looked surgical, others looked like they came from shrapnel or burns. "Stop stirring," Connor said softly. "I'm sorry, Grace sat down beside him. "You've been through so much." "So have you." "It's not the same, I didn't go to war." "No, but you went to battle with yourself, that's just as hard." Connor's eyes met hers, maybe harder. The chapel groaned as wind battered it from all sides. Grace instinctively moved closer to Connor. She felt his warmth even through the blanket. "We're safe here," Connor said. "This building's been standing for over 100 years. It'll hold." "How do you know?" "Because it has to," his voice was certain. "I'm not losing anyone else." The words hung heavy between them. Grace understood what he meant. Marcus, his friend who died. Connor carried that loss like a weight around his neck. "It wasn't your fault," Grace said again. You keep saying that. Because it's true. Connor's jaw tightened. You don't know what happened that day. Then tell me. He was quiet for so long Grace thought he wouldn't answer. Outside, lightning split the sky, thunder followed seconds later. We were clearing buildings in Kandahar, Connor said finally. Intelligence said the block was empty, but intel was wrong. There were insurgents in one of the houses. His voice went flat, emotionless. Marcus went in first, that was protocol. I was supposed to follow, but I stopped just for a second. Something didn't feel right. Grace waited, not breathing. That second saved my life. The building exploded, IED rigged to the door. Connor's hands clenched. Marcus died instantly, 3 other guys were injured, and I was standing there untouched because I hesitated. You didn't hesitate, you had instincts that saved you. My instincts should have saved him too. I should have stopped him, should have checked the building myself, should have. Should have what? Died instead. Grace's voice came out sharper than she intended. You think that would have helped anyone? Connor looked at her, pain etched across his face. At least his family wouldn't hate me. They don't hate you. His mom won't return my calls. His dad told me at the funeral that I should have protected him, that it was my job to bring him home. Grace's heart broke. She reached out without thinking and took Connor's hand. His fingers were still cold. Parents say things when they're grieving, she said quietly. Things they don't mean. My mom blamed herself for my sister's death for 2 years, said she should have driven her that night, should have made her stay home. Should have, but none of it would have changed anything. Connor stared at their joined hands. When did she stop blaming herself? When she finally accepted that some things are just beyond our control. Grace's thumb brushed across his knuckles. That's the hardest lesson, isn't it? Accepting that we're not God, we can't control everything, we can't save everyone. Is that what you learned in the convent, to let go? Grace laughed, but it sounded sad. I haven't let go of anything, I just buried it all and pretended it was faith. Connor turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. What are you going to do when we get rescued? The question felt impossible. 2 weeks ago, Grace had known exactly what she was doing. She was taking her final vows, becoming Sister Grace, dedicating her life to service and prayer. Now, sitting in a storm-battered chapel with a broken soldier holding her hand, she didn't know anything anymore. I don't know, she whispered. You don't have to decide tonight. I have to decide in 2 weeks, that's when the ceremony is. A lot can change in 2 weeks, Connor's eyes searched hers. You can change your mind. Can I? I've spent 6 years preparing for this. The sisters are counting on me. My family thinks this is my calling. But what do you think? Grace felt tears building again. I think I'm terrified. I think maybe I chose this life because I was too scared to choose anything else. I think, her voice broke, I think I don't know who I am without the convent. Connor's free hand came up to her face, his thumb catching a tear that escaped. Then maybe it's time to find out. The touch sent electricity through her. Grace should pull away, should remind herself that she'd taken vows of celibacy, that she'd promised herself to God. But those vows weren't final yet, and right now, God felt very far away. Connor felt close. This is wrong, Grace breathed. I know. We barely know each other. I know that too. I'm supposed to become a nun in 2 weeks. Grace, Connor's voice was rough. Tell me to stop. Tell me you don't feel this and I'll let go right now. I'll keep my distance. We'll survive this storm and get rescued and never see each other again. Grace's heart hammered. She could do it. Could tell him to stop. Could rebuild her walls and go back to San Francisco and take her vows and spend the rest of her life wondering what if. Or she could be honest. I can't, she whispered. Can't what? Can't tell you I don't feel this. More tears fell. I feel it, Connor. I feel everything and it terrifies me. Connor's forehead dropped to rest against hers. They sat like that, breathing the same air, hands intertwined. Grace could feel his heartbeat, could feel her own matching it. What do we do? She asked. I don't know. The storm raged around them. The chapel creaked and groaned. Water dripped steadily into containers. And Grace Morneau sat in the candlelight with a man who made her feel alive for the first time in 6 years. She didn't know if that feeling was salvation or damnation. Maybe it was both. Connor pulled back slightly, his hand still cupping her face. "We should sleep, tomorrow we'll figure this out." But neither of them moved. "Connor." "Yes." "What happens when we get rescued?" His thumb traced her cheekbone. "What do you want to happen?" Grace didn't have an answer, or maybe she did, but she was too scared to say it out loud. The candle between them flickered. In its dying light, Connor looked at her like she was something precious, something worth fighting for. And Grace realized with startling clarity that she'd never had anyone look at her that way before. Not before her sister died, not during her years at the convent, never. "I don't want to lose this," she heard herself say, "whatever this is." Connor's expression turned fierce. "Then don't." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because I've made promises, because people are counting on me, because—" Connor kissed her. It was soft and brief and completely devastating. Grace's entire world tilted on its axis. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with emotion. "Now it's complicated," he said quietly. Grace couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the ghost of his lips on hers and the way her entire body was screaming for more. Outside, lightning illuminated the world in stark white. And Grace knew with terrifying certainty that nothing would ever be the same. Grace didn't sleep. She lay on her makeshift bed, staring at the ceiling, touching her lips. Connor was across from her, his breathing steady. She didn't know if he was really asleep or just pretending. The kiss played in her mind on repeat, soft, gentle, completely unexpected. Everything she'd spent 6 years avoiding. When dawn finally came, the storm had passed again. Grace sat up and found Connor already awake, watching her. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi." The word felt inadequate for everything between them. Connor stood and walked to the window, waters receding, skies clearing. Grace joined him. The ocean looked almost peaceful now, deceptive, like it hadn't just tried to destroy everything. "Someone will come soon," Connor said. "Today, maybe tomorrow." Grace's stomach twisted. "And then what?" Connor turned to face her. "You tell me." "Connor, about last night." "Don't," his voice was firm. "Don't apologize, don't tell me it was a mistake." "But it was, I'm supposed to." "You're supposed to what? Deny what you're feeling? Pretend this didn't happen?" Connor stepped closer. "I've spent 14 months pretending, Grace, pretending I'm fine, pretending I don't wake up every night seeing Marcus's face, pretending I don't feel like I died in that explosion too. But then I met you," Connor continued. "And for the first time since I came home, I felt something besides guilt and rage. I felt hope." "I can't be your hope," Grace whispered. "I'm barely holding myself together." "Maybe that's the point. Maybe we're supposed to hold each other together." The words hung in the air like a promise. Before Grace could respond, a sound cut through the silence, distant but unmistakable. A helicopter. They ran outside together. Sure enough, a Coast Guard helicopter circled the island. Connor waved his arms and Grace did the same. The helicopter dipped lower, then began to descend on the beach. Relief flooded through Grace. They were saved. So why did she feel like crying? The helicopter landed and 2 Coast Guard officers jumped out. One was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes. "Grace Moreno," she called out. Grace nodded, surprised. "The convent's been looking for you. They reported you missing 2 days ago." The officer looked at Connor. "And you must be Connor Blake. Veterans Affairs filed a report." Connor's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "We're taking you both back to San Francisco," the officer said. "Medical team's waiting. You'll need to be checked out." Everything happened quickly after that. They were loaded into the helicopter. Grace watched the island disappear below them, and part of her wanted to jump out, wanted to go back to that chapel where everything was simple. Where it was just her and Connor and the truth. The flight to San Francisco took 40 minutes. They landed at a hospital near the Presidio. Grace was separated from Connor immediately. A doctor examined her, asking questions she barely heard. She was dehydrated but otherwise fine. Physically, at least. When she was cleared, Sister Margaret was waiting. The older nun embraced her tightly. "Grace, thank God, we were so worried." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Hush, it wasn't your fault." Sister Margaret pulled back, studying her face. "But you need rest. The ceremony is in 12 days. We have so much to prepare." 12 days. Grace felt the walls closing in again. Sister Margaret, I need to. Not now, dear, you've been through a trauma. Come home, we'll talk later. But Grace didn't move. Where's Connor? Sister Margaret's expression shifted. The young man you were with, they took him to the psychiatric ward. Apparently, it's standard protocol for veterans in crisis. Grace's heart stopped. He's not in crisis, he just needs. Grace, Sister Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. That's not your concern, your place is with us, with God. The words felt like a cage snapping shut. Grace let herself be led away. Let Sister Margaret take her to the convent. Let the familiar routine wash over her like a blanket. But nothing felt familiar anymore. That night, Grace knelt in the chapel at the convent, the same chapel she'd knelt in hundreds of times before. She tried to pray, but the words felt hollow. All she could think about was Connor, alone in a hospital, probably thinking she'd abandoned him. Maybe she had. Having doubts is normal. Grace looked up. Sister Margaret stood in the doorway. Before I took my vows, I almost left, the older nun said, sitting beside her. I was in love with someone, a good man. He asked me to marry him. Grace stared. She'd never heard this story. What happened? She asked. I chose this life and I've never regretted it. Sister Margaret's eyes were soft. But Grace, I chose it because I genuinely felt called, not because I was running from pain. Grace's throat tightened. I've watched you these past 6 years, Sister Margaret continued. You're devoted, disciplined, kind, but you've never looked joyful, and joy is supposed to be part of faith. I don't know how to feel joy anymore, Grace whispered. Don't you? Sister Margaret smiled slightly. Because when you talked about that young man just now, your eyes lit up for the first time since you've been here. Grace felt tears spilling over. I'm so confused. Then don't take your vows, not yet. But everyone's expecting. Everyone will understand. Sister Margaret took her hand. Grace, you came to us broken, we helped you heal, but maybe healing means finding your way back to the world, not hiding from it forever. What if I'm making a mistake? What if you're not? The question echoed in Grace's mind all night. By morning, she knew what she had to do. Grace found Connor at the VA hospital across town. He was sitting in a common room, staring out a window. He looked tired, defeated. Until he saw her. Grace, he stood quickly. I didn't think you'd come. I'm sorry, they wouldn't tell me where you were. I had to call 3 different hospitals. Connor's expression softened. You looked for me. Of course I did. They stood there, uncertain. Grace was hyper-aware that they weren't alone. Other veterans sat around the room. A nurse watched from the doorway. Can we go somewhere, Grace asked, to talk? Connor led her to a small garden outside. They sat on a bench surrounded by roses, so different from the storm-battered island. How are you? Grace asked. Fine, they're keeping me for observation, making sure I'm not a danger to myself or others. Connor's voice was bitter, standard procedure apparently. I'm so sorry. Not your fault, he finally looked at her. When's your ceremony? 12 days, but Connor. You should go through with it if that's what you want. What I want? Grace laughed, but it came out shaky. I don't know what I want anymore, you made me question everything. Good. Connor turned to face her fully. Grace, I've been sitting here thinking about Marcus, about the war, about why I'm so angry all the time. Grace waited. I'm angry because I survived and he didn't, because I came home and nothing made sense anymore, because I didn't know how to live with the guilt. Connor took a breath. But then I met you, and you made me want to try. Grace's heart pounded. You made me want to forgive myself, Connor continued. To believe that maybe surviving means something, that maybe I'm supposed to be here. You are supposed to be here, Grace said fiercely. Then stay with me? Connor took her hands. Don't go back to the convent, stay, figure out who you are, what you want. Give yourself permission to live, not just exist. Grace felt tears streaming down her face. I'm scared. I know, so am I. What if we're just trauma bonded? What if this feeling goes away when we're not stuck on an island? Connor smiled. Then we figure that out together, but Grace, I don't think this goes away, I think this is real. Grace looked at their joined hands, thought about the kiss, about the way Connor saw through all her defenses, about how alive she felt when she was with him. Thought about spending the rest of her life wondering what if. I can't take my vows, she whispered. Connor's grip tightened. Are you sure? No, but I'm sure that taking them would be a lie. I'm not called to that life. I was just hiding. Grace met his eyes, and I don't want to hide anymore. Connor pulled her into his arms. Grace buried her face in his shoulder and cried for the life she'd thought she wanted, for her sister, for the girl she used to be, and for the woman she was finally becoming. When she pulled back, Connor was smiling. What? Grace asked. You're beautiful when you're brave. Grace laughed through her tears. I'm terrified. That's what makes it brave. They sat in the garden as the sun climbed higher. Grace told Connor about her conversation with Sister Margaret, about how she'd spend the next few months figuring out what came next. Maybe therapy, maybe going back to school, maybe just learning how to be in the world again. Connor told her about his treatment plan: group therapy twice a week, individual counseling, learning to manage his anger and his guilt. We're both pretty messed up, Grace said. Yeah, but at least we're messed up together. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. What happens now? I don't know, we take it slow, we figure it out. I've never really dated anyone, not properly. Connor laughed. Me neither, not in a long time. This is going to be complicated. Probably. We might fail. We might. Connor pressed a kiss to her forehead, but we might not. Grace closed her eyes, feeling the sun on her face. For the first time in 7 years, the future didn't feel like something to hide from. It felt like possibility. 3 months later, Grace stood on Ocean Beach in San Francisco, watching the waves. Connor stood beside her, his hand in hers. She'd left the convent, rented a small apartment in the Sunset District, started seeing a therapist, got a job at a community center helping at-risk youth. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was hers. Connor was doing better too, still in therapy, still dealing with nightmares, but fighting through them instead of drowning in anger. They'd taken things slow: coffee dates, long walks, hours of talking, learning each other outside the intensity of survival. And the feeling hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown stronger. You okay? Connor asked, squeezing her hand. Grace smiled. Yeah, I really am. No regrets. About leaving the convent? Grace considered. No, I think Sister Margaret was right. I needed that time to heal, but I was never meant to stay forever. Connor pulled her closer. And now? Now I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The waves crashed against the shore, powerful and relentless. Grace used to be afraid of that kind of power, afraid of anything she couldn't control. But she'd learned something on that island during the storm. Sometimes you had to let yourself be swept away. Sometimes the scariest thing was also the right thing. Sometimes love meant taking a leap of faith into the unknown. Connor turned her to face him, his hands framing her face like he had that night in the chapel. I love you, he said, simple, direct, true. Grace's heart soared. I love you too. When he kissed her this time, there was no guilt, no fear, just two broken people choosing to heal together. Choosing hope over hiding. Choosing life over just surviving. And as the San Francisco fog rolled in over the ocean, Grace Morneau finally felt what she'd been searching for all those years. Peace, purpose, home. Not in a convent or a chapel or a set of vows, but in the arms of a soldier who'd taught her that the bravest thing you could do was let yourself feel. Let yourself live. Let yourself love.